All right, Grant, moving out of Washington State to avoid the estate tax is that something we're actually seeing people do?
Yeah, occasionally, not everyone, but Washington does have the one of the highest estate taxes in the country. And so a lot of people don't like seeing all of their hard-earned wealth go to those taxes. And, for example, someone who has a $10 million net worth, they're going to give up $1.25 million of taxes. And that's a lot of wealth lost to their families. So that's just really a tough pill for those families to swallow.
And
So
that's just to the state estate tax, is that
that,
right?
yeah, to be clear, that's just the state tax, not some of the other taxes that get layered on top. So for some people, it's the right decision to move out of the state. For others, they can certainly explore some less extreme options.
Well, so let's walk through this briefly together. For anybody watching, make sure to read the linked article for further discussion about specific strategies. We're not going to get into so much of that here in this video, but in case this is the first time that folks are learning about this, Grant, can you walk us through how this works a little bit?
Yeah, why don't you pull up that graphic here on the screen here so we can take a look at this. So if you look at this graphic, this is our in the estate, out of the estate slide. And if you look at the left slide, this helps you understand how the estate tax works by default. So someone who does no planning, doesn't change anything, how it works there. And then the right side looks at more of how people can plan or make changes to enact change for family or charitable reasons. But we're not going to go in a lot of detail of that here.
Yeah, and again, like I said, we've got resources linked in the article. The article itself goes through some strategies, but then it links to other articles that we've written about specific strategies for both the Washington State estate tax as well as if you're exposed to the federal estate tax, resources there as well.
Yeah, and if you look on the left, everything in your estate is everything you own. So when the inside means you own it, and all of that is subject to Washington State estate tax. So when you die, everything passes to your spouse, generally tax-free. Then at your spouse's death, that's when your estate goes down through what we like to coin at Alterra, the tax tunnel. So you do get a certain amount of wealth to pass estate tax-free. In Washington State, that's 2.193 million, and that's available to each individual. But it doesn't happen by default for each individual. It's per individual and takes some planning.
And that's we sometimes hear that called an exemption. Is that right?
That is correct. That's a Washington estate tax exemption. Then comes federal estate tax, which we cover a little bit more in the article. Then any income tax due on assets that may have those due on it. And then what's remaining ends up transferring to your family.
So that's what we see by default. That's right?
That is correct. And, as I mentioned before, we looked at that $10 million example. After it goes through this tax tunnel, 1.25 million is accrued in taxes, and that's just the state estate tax. So when we start adding in the other layers of taxes that come in to play on some of the families we work with, we've seen the total tax bill climb into the 50% of their wealth range.
Well, that would explain why some people want to move, I guess.
Correct.
So one of the things we like to think about is, Grant, like you mentioned, the plan by default versus the plan by design. So if we look at, we're going to go through a couple examples here. So if you started, you gave the example of dying with $10 million in the state of Washington, that leading to about 1.25 million in just state estate tax. One of the things we're doing is helping people look forward to see what the problem looks like today, but what is forecast to be in the future. So for example, if somebody is watching this and has an estate that's worth about $5 million today, and that grows for 5% for 30 years, that's going to look like about $21.6 million, which is great. But then if we look at the taxes you're going to owe at today's estate tax rates, if we look at Washington State plus any federal estate tax that would be due, you're looking at about between 6.1 and $6.2 million. Based on your plan by default, that's 28% of that estate going to estate taxes. That's not ideal. Now, if you increase that tenfold, let's say you're starting with 50 million today. Of course, your estate's going to grow just 10 times the number we looked at before to 216 million. But the amount of taxes you're going to pay, again, because people get those exemptions first, and then the tax rates climb, these people are looking at losing half their estate to taxes. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, it can grow up to that level.
So this is your default plan, unless you've done any other planning. building a plan by design usually means working with a team like ours at Alterra in conjunction with an estate planning attorney, sometimes a CPA, depending on kind of what level of complexity that you have. Based on the size of your estate, is going to lead to how big the tax problem is, and then starting to work through things you can do about it. If through that investigation you find you've done some of these calculations and the estate tax is little to nothing for your estate, then great, you don't have a problem. But in a lot of cases, we're finding that when you forecast it out, the problem is much bigger than a lot of people give it credit for.
Yeah, and where this usually leads when you're doing the plan by design process is it's going to be a thorough planning process to help you look at what assets you should choose to keep in your estate that you're okay with going through that tax tunnel, and then what assets you want to move to the out column, where it can get into charitable or other kind of family type planning. They'll move it to the out of the estate column where it passes completely free of those taxes. And so we detail a few of these examples in the linked article. So to go a little deeper, I'd encourage you to read on about that there.
Well, thanks for walking through an initial overview of how that works. If you're watching this and you're concerned about these types of estate taxes, you're welcome to reach out to have a discussion. Otherwise, we hope this has been helpful to you.